Welcome to the WanderLearn podcast. I'm your host, Tapon. In this episode, I talk with a family of 7 that went to 7 continents over 9 months. Can you imagine doing that? I sure can't. It's hard enough to do it solo, but can you imagine going with 7 and all the 5 children in the family are teenagers? That's right. Go to globalteenadventures.com to find out more about them. This is Kyle and Leanne Huebner who did this insane trip that got cut short thanks to COVID-19. But their year-long trip did last for 9 months, and you're going to hear all about it. And don't forget to go to patreon.com/ftapon to get some rewards. Thank you so much, and enjoy this episode. I'm your host, Tapon. I'm here with Kyle and Leanne Huebner. How are you guys? You're coming in from a wild, crazy trip. Tell us all about the general overview of what you guys have done.
Well, we just got back from was supposed to be a year, but turned out to be a 9-month adventure around the world. We hit 7 continents, 43 countries, with ourselves and our 5 teenagers. People thought we were crazy when we said we were going to do this.
And we still think you are. In fact, you just have proven that you're crazy.
No, it's all good. It's all good. But it was a kind of a pipe dream 10 years ago that kind of led into one thing led to the other that just kind of made it come true. So we're really quite fortunate to have the opportunity.
Go ahead, Kyle.
So the kids, so we have 3 of our own who are 13, 15, and 17 during the trip, just turned 18. And then about 4 years ago, my sister passed away. She was a single mom, so we took in her 4 kids, really. And so 2 of them were younger and came to live with us. And so they were 15 and 17 on the trip. The 2 older ones were in their senior year in college, so they had to finish college and couldn't really have the opportunity to go on the trip. So we ended up with 13-year-old girl, 15-year-old boy, 15-year-old girl, 17-year-old boy, 17-year-old boy. And
got it.
So
3 of your kids are biological?
Yes.
And the rest are synthetic?
Well,
we're
the robots.
We're legal. We're legal guardian. We're legal guardian.
They're nieces and nephews.
Yeah.
Wow.
So technically, at the holidays, we have 7 kids.
Wow.
But for most of the year in the house, we have 5, and so.
So, which of you lunatics came up with this wacky idea?
Well, it was certainly something that I had talked to Kyle about doing, 10 years earlier, but it was always just a pipe dream. Anytime he came home frustrated from his job, I would say, well, you know what? Why don't we just do this?
Take a year off and travel.
Just take a year off and travel. And so he's very logical, and he definitely many times said, that's just, insane. There's no way we could do that. And so it's incredible. Sometimes you put a little seed, and that seed starts to plant. But then you want to take.
Yeah. So really, we didn't travel with the kids internationally for up until 4 years ago. And we're like, they're not going to appreciate museums in France, it's 7 years old. Mm-hmm. So 3-4 years ago, we started off, we went to Vancouver, that summer, start easy, same time zone, next country over. We did a cruise to Mexico. Then the next summer, we went to Iceland, and they absolutely loved it. And they were literally like, this was our favorite vacation we've ever taken.
And it was one of those journey vacations. We took a car and we rented it from, I know I'm going to say the capital name, Reykjavik. And we drove around Ring Road. And it was like no other place in the world we had been. It was almost like we were we're in a storybook or a children's storybook when we're there. I mean, there's rolling hills and there's flowers and
waterfalls, glaciers, ice hiking, snowmobiling.
And it's so relatively unpopulated that really you just are truly just enjoying nature at its best. And so that trip kind of sparked a real love of traveling or on a journey kind of vacation, not just kind of a destination where you sit on a beach kind of vacation. So I think that kind of sparked an interest in our kids.
And what was the age range of your kids at that time?
Oh, well, they were...
So it's 2 years ago. So they would have been 11, 13, and 15.
Yeah.
Got it.
So
okay.
middle childhood.
So then really what happened is, one of the big things that happened is our oldest son, John, got into opera singing. And so the next summer, he spent a month in New York training with an opera professional program. He spent a month in San Francisco with San Francisco Opera Conservatory. And then he had a program in Salzburg
with the Vienna Philharmonic
to sing in the Salzburg Festival. So we took the kids over to Austria. And that's when I think we started to think more seriously, because at that point, I had been at Stamps 19 and a half years. And my goal was to make it to 20 and then kind of wrap up the corporate life.
Yeah.
So I knew that in 6 months I was going to have an opportunity where I wouldn't be working. And then, John started to get international stuff for the next summer. So he got accepted into a program that had performances in South Korea and Japan. He got accepted into a program at the Sydney Opera House. Wow. So that's when it started to come together where, we're like, okay, kids, what do you think if we take a year and travel? The other thing that lined up perfectly is 2 of the kids were finishing 8th grade. So they were going into a different high school than their middle school. So that was the perfect time to take a gap year. So we kind of figured, okay, Ashley's going to do homeschooling from the road for 6th grade. The 2 that just finished 8th grade do a gap year, and then they just start high school fresh. The 2 older ones were like, okay, the whole point of the trip is to learn. So we're like, there's no way they can be doing AP classes in a high school schedule from the road. So we're like, okay, it's a gap year. And it was toughest on them because, their friends move ahead a year. So John was going into 12th grade, so his friends kind of moved ahead and graduated, during his gap year. But
they were willing to take the risk.
Yeah, and then,
proud of them.
So then it was cool. John kind of created this opera program that once his kind of organized performances were done, he went and was singing kind of on all the continents and a lot of the countries. He has this whole thing about, opera in the U.S. is very it's, it's, you need money. It's the affluent, older affluent crowd. And so he wanted to do this free concert series to, kind of expose people of, all incomes and cultures and backgrounds to the world of live opera. So it kind of fit in perfectly with the gap year. And so, that's how it started, and then, you get into the real work, and it was overwhelming. I mean, just not even, I think one of the things that surprised me was it wasn't even the travel stuff. It was all the other stuff, just to get ready.
Right. Leanne, give us some examples of some of the travel stuff that you had to get ready.
Well, for the first thing I did was talk to you because I knew you were the expert on this, and I don't want to discount the fact that you were truly an inspiration to of lead us to even consider this kind of trip, which is great.
But I don't have any kids, at least that I know of.
Well, but yeah, so in terms of just getting ready for this, first of all, it's just where, right? And so where are we going to go? And so Kyle had a great idea of going to all of our kids and having them create a list and tell us 10 countries that you want to go visit. We're figuring, probably half of the countries would be similar. And, we get back the list. They're all different countries. like, how do we make everybody happy? So we kind of rethought why didn't we say 5 countries? But what was interesting is that the countries that they chose were really based on their own sort of interest in a sense. So, for instance, one of our teens it likes adventure and hiking and exploring, and so that list was more the South America countries and
Australia,
Switzerland for skiing and things like that. And then John, the opera singer, is a little bit more into cultures and indigenous cultures and histories, deep into history. So his list contained Tibet and Turkey,
China, Tibet, Russia, Turkey, Egypt, and I'm going, John, did you pick the least safe places on purpose?
Well, all countries have their pros and cons, right? But certainly we did cross-reference the countries that they chose with what was on the U.S. Advisory list. Mm-hmm. And so that was a concern only because it's a family. Obviously, we want to make sure that we're going to places that have kind of infrastructures where we would feel comfortable traveling with a family.
Right.
And
by the way, sorry to interrupt, but on your website, which is globalteenadventures.com, you have a ranking under your rankings menu, like the top 10 trip rankings. Now, is that top 10 list that each one of your children kind of made a top 10 list? Is that after the trip or was that before the trip?
Great question. It is after the trip.
Okay, got it.
So it would be interesting to cross-reference.
They did a list of the top 10 before the trip, and then now this is the one after the trip.
Yes.
Got it.
Yes.
Okay.
And and I think that there were definitely countries on the list that we entered into that some of us had never even heard of or really never thought of, maybe couldn't even spell. So it was so eye-opening. And, I had already been to many countries before, a couple dozen countries before we left. But I would have to say that this to me was just such an eye-opening trip to just be able to experience this kind of life of the journey of a long-term travel opportunity. And it was really such a gift.
So I think one of the things is when you looked at the lists, all 7 of our lists, what became clear is that we were going to have to go to a lot of places for a shorter period of time. Mm-hmm. And so the strategy was kind of to make sure we were, going to places that met everyone's interests. So some people weren't really interested in Tibet, but then, really wanted to go to Paris. And so, our strategy became, expose them to as much of the world as possible and let them figure out where they want to come back and spend more time, in their life, during their life when they get the opportunities.
Did you guys see ever a situation where, one of your children says, "There's no fucking way I'm going to go to Tibet. No way. And I hate that place." And then they got there and they're like, "Wow, this is amazing." Or whatever country or whatever place.
I actually don't think our kids were... they were very open-minded to where we were going. It was probably less what we were doing. So, but for the most part, it was smooth sailing. I mean, they were very, very open-minded to what we were doing. But there was certainly a day or two there where I'm not going to another museum today. Okay. I remember one day, our oldest son really took that role of being the oldest and helped plan. And he would come to us the night before and say, "This is how I've planned out tomorrow. And this is the kind of teen part of the day," and it would be like bowling, or this keeps the group together. And so I think he played a very nice role in between being a adult negotiator and kind of team player there. But I really think we really lucked out. We really lucked out in the sense that their minds were really open to experiencing, all that we had to see and do. So
yeah, I would say it's not so much that they weren't like, we're not going to a place, but there were definitely countries where, we didn't know much about it. Our expectations were very low. And then we were kind of blown away, And so I know for me, like Myanmar was one of my favorite countries. Like, I didn't even know where that was, before I started planning the trip. It was funny. We were in Helsinki. We took the ferry to St. Petersburg. And so when I'm booking it, they say, hey, for $19, do you want to go to Tallinn? And I'm like, John, what do you think? Should we go to Tallinn? He's like, oh, yeah, that would be awesome. Let's go to Tallinn. So I'm like, okay, $19, we go to Tapon. He's like, well, then you got to go to Riga. It's right next to each other. And, so it wasn't even on our original list, but we ended up building in, and it was just like 2.5 days in, Estonia, Latvia, and then we did a 1-day trip to the Hill Crosses in Lithuania. And I love that. I love that part of the trip. And it was like, I had no expectations. I never would have put it on my list. So I think there are countries like that. Everyone loved Croatia. That was like across the board, and we did a lot of different things. We went to Zagreb, Plitvice, Split, and Dubrovnik, and then a day trip to Bosnia. And so, that was one country that I don't think the kids really had any expectations, and they all ended up loving it.
And I think that makes a good point that the more time you can spend into a country, the better experience that you can get from it, because visiting 4 cities in that country just made it more memorable for us. And you could see a lot of kind of similarities to the cities, but you see some differences, obviously, especially from an architectural perspective.
What was what was a low point in the trip where everything, because finally in the end, COVID came and kind of put a close to your trip. So maybe that was the low point, but what was for you the low point of the trip?
Well, for me, the low point was the high point because it was going to Tibet. We all were prepared for altitude sickness. We had all taken, I forget what the medication was, but we took one to help us adjust. And it was my birthday, the end of September. And it turned out that all of us ended up being impacted by the altitude sickness and nausea. And so it was the only time we actually had to alter our itinerary. We planned about 2 months ahead. And this guy did a great job, Kyle. You are, planner extraordinary. I will give all the credit to my husband. But at this point, we had to go to a hospital in Tibet.
John had a really bad cough.
And John had a really bad cough at this point. And so we had to kind of alter our plans for 24 hours. We just kind of saw how it went. But we were taken care of so well. I mean, the people were so kind to us. They were really worried about us. We got oxygen tanks delivered to our hotel room to help us. And they actually have that, they regularly have that in their hotels, because this is not an uncommon thing if you're not used to altitude. They are. And it's at, 12,000 feet?
Well, Lhasa is like 11 something. And then we drove from Lhasa to Mount Everest. And so eventually you get to 16,000.
Yeah. And so
like 5,000 meters.
Yeah. So, all 6 of the 7 of us were under the advisable, like 90% oxygen. So we all took oxygen at that point. So that was good.
Let's take a step back. Where did you fly into Lhasa?
Yeah.
Yes.
So the route was
from sea level?
From China. So we flew to Beijing. And then we went from Beijing by train to Xi'an, and Xi'an to Chengdu. So Chengdu is one of the places that was on Ashley's list with the giant pandas. She's like, if we don't go to Chengdu, I'm not going on the trip. So
we had these deals. We had some deals.
we flew from Chengdu, which is pretty much sea level, to Lhasa. Okay. Like in one fell swoop. And then from Lhasa, we leave by a van and just keep going higher.
So in
higher.
Lhasa, were you already experiencing altitude sickness? Already?
Yeah.
Okay. And then wait a second. So you were experiencing altitude sickness, and then somebody had the bright idea to then go drive to Everest?
Well,
that was on our plan.
Well, we had planned a couple of days to assimilate, right? Which you're supposed to do. We probably
acclimatize?
Yes, we had already been climatizing, and so.
But you were sick, though. I mean, in other words, you had altitude sickness. I mean, so your acclimatizing wasn't going very well.
We went higher, which is why we took the extra day to stop.
Okay.
I think it was Shigatse at like 14,000 feet that we actually went to the hospital and said, we got to just stop here. We can't keep going higher.
So in retrospect, if somebody's listening to this and they're going to Lhasa, and let's say they arrived there and they're already feeling altitude sickness, you would just advise them to spend an extra couple of days before moving on to Everest.
Yeah, I mean, we only gave ourselves 3 days in Lhasa, but it wasn't enough.
Yeah, we could probably use an extra. But I think that's one of the things is that the more people that are in your group, probably the more flexibility you need to have in your schedule. And it was difficult for us to continue to have a lot of flexibility because we were relying on plane flights, right? If we didn't get to this one, we needed to get this one. And it's a little different if you're buying one plane ticket versus you're buying 7 plane tickets, right? That's a huge financial cost that you have to if you don't make your journey times. So, but we were able to do it, and it actually turned out to be a better situation because of the accommodations were actually better at the place that we stayed back at. So that was good. So it worked out.
And I have to say, so we go to the hospital, and you're like, that was one of our kind of concerns is like, what if you have to go to hospital in, a less developed country? Well, it was a, modern hospital.
Brand new.
Been built
6
within
months.
the last, year. John saw the doctor, got an x-ray and ultrasound. All 7 of us got oxygen, and the bill was no insurance, just the bill was like $61.
Wow.
So I'm like, okay, that's better than the U.S.
Yeah. I mean, we had a lot of fears before the trip. I mean, I certainly did myself. And of course, that's one of the fears, right? It's just like, what if we need healthcare? And so the few times that we had to access healthcare, it was great. It was just as good as we would have anticipated in our own country. So fortunately, we didn't have anything super serious when we were on the trip, but that was good. We recovered, so that was great.
We're going to take a quick commercial break, and when we get back, we're going to talk more about some of the details and some of the best stories that you guys have from this trip. Today's WanderLearn episode is brought to you by Sawyer. Yeah, that's the same Sawyer that makes those lightweight water filters that are awesome for backpacking and cleaning your water when you're traveling. Did you know that their filters also fit on water bottles and come in a variety of squeeze pouches and gravity flow systems? And here's a more sober note. Did you know that there are over 500,000 deaths so far this year from dirty water diseases? Sawyer has decided to make a difference and use their systems to make Liberia the first low-income nation to have clean water in every household from border to border. Over 100,000 filters have been placed so far. Sawyer is reaching the 20% of rural households that were thought to be impossible to reach with clean water. And it's working. So far, the use of Sawyer water filters has reduced diarrhea by over 90%. And Sawyer didn't stop there. They have also provided another 100,000 filters to households in Fiji. Listen, I love it when people step up and try to make a positive difference in this planet. Sawyer keeps you outdoors and keeps your drinking water safe. And we're back to the WanderLearn podcast here with Kyle and Leanne Huebner, who went on a trip to all 7 continents. Is it 43 countries? Am I right?
Yep, 43 countries. 122 Amazing. Cities.
And with 20 children on your back?
Felt like that way.
Yeah, so there were 7 of you going around together. Were there logistical challenges that really only a family of 7 faced, that had it just been you 2 together, you would have never faced? Give us an example
apparently,
where that really hit the fan.
Apparently, you can't buy plane tickets for 7 people easily.
What a surprise.
So most apps are written. Most apps written for the 6.
A lot of them limit you to 6 at a time.
So just right there
you
was
have to
was
make
a
2
little
different
bit of a challenge.
reservations under 2 different.
Yes.
2 different orders.
Yeah. So just
So
like
you're really why did they limit people to 6 tickets at a time?
I think it's just the app. They just assume that people don't have more than 4 children these days, I suppose. But so right there. But I think the other piece, obviously, is just the managing of the luggage, right? So we couldn't just get in a regular taxi, right? We pretty much always had to make sure that we either get 2 taxis or try to book a larger van if we possibly could. So, and obviously, we wanted to take this trip in and not totally break the bank. So we had to really be careful about, little costs like that could just add up and blow our budget. So that was one thing. So managing luggage. What else?
So tell us about the luggage situation. Like, did you limit each kid to 1 piece of luggage?
We started off with 1 large backpack and 1 small backpack. But as we went around the world, we realized that luggage checking in the United States is very different than abroad. Like, there's all sorts of different restrictions on weights and everything. So we constantly were kind of reshuffling our luggage into each other's. And we did end up kind of adding a bag here and there, but purging, right? So, we did pick up some souvenirs along the way. So we had what we called a shed box. And every month or so, we would send a shed box home. And everyone knew that was coming. And so by the end of the trip, we pretty much just have a couple pairs of underwears and then 2 outfits, But, but over time, we probably got even better with it.
Yeah, I mean, we actually started off and, had this, grand plan that, everyone was going to have, a backpack that they could carry on and put above, and then, a backpack, for their day backpack, and we wouldn't have to check any bags. Well, going from Canada back to New York City, we're in the airport, and it's they have these self-check-in things, luggage things. So it's trying to go through this whole process 7 different times, who's got what luggage, and so we get through and we get to the security, and we had all our liquids and travel size things, but we get there and they're there's a little 100 milliliter Ziploc bag, and they're everything has to fit in this bag. So here, all 7 of us are opening our bags, taking stuff out, trying to fit it in. The line's piling up behind us. Security's look, you got to get out of the way. And so I'm okay, this isn't gonna work. And then when we were leaving from JFK to London, they wanted to weigh our carry-on bags. And so then, we were over the limit. So now we're in the middle of Kennedy, opening every bag, redistributing weight, trying to reweigh everything. And, this strategy's not going to work. So we switched to checking bags. And then it became okay, all the toiletries go in the check bag. Everybody gets 1 check bag and 1... backpack that they take on the plane with them. And so you just had to build in extra time to get to the airport. And, we're when there's a self-check-in machine, we're nope, we want to go wait online. Way easier to have, just give 7 passports to the agent and say, here's our 7 bags, check us in.
And I will say one thing that I thought we learned as we went along, and we are much better travelers at the end of the trip than we were at the beginning of the trip. So now it's smooth sailing. We know exactly how to get through everything. But I think that we realize how little you really do need on a day-to-day basis. And when we came home and started transitioning back to all the stuff we have at home, I'm sitting there just giving away clothes. I'm I don't need this. I didn't use it for a year. Right. And so you realize that your stuff can become a burden. And so that's one life lesson that I have now, is that you need a lot less stuff in this world than you think.
Yeah,
that's very wise.
There was one story. So, every time I'm making a reservation, or getting a visa, it's all 7 people, names, birth dates, passport numbers, expiration date. I'm entering a massive amount of data. And so it's my fear is always okay, I messed something up in the data entry. And so there was one where we were in, I forget the country, it was in Asia, and I had misspelled Ashlyn's name. And so we go to check in, and the guy, like, checks her in, but then he's like, wait, the name on the ticket doesn't match the passport. I can't check you in. So, like, he's like, you got to go over to this other guy, you know, cross the airport. So Ashlyn kind of gets this look like, am I going to get left here?
Which we would never do. We would never do.
So we go across the airport, and I go to that guy, and he's like typing it in. He goes, well, the other guy already checked you in, so I can't change any of the information. So, like, we had to go back to that guy and, like, beg and plead, like, for him. I'm like, the other guy said you can, you know, you have it open, you can change it. And
another life lesson, just be really nice all the time.
So we got through him, but then we, like, have to go through security, and we're like, what if security notices, like,
things will go wrong, and that you just have to overcome them, and you learn through the experience. So,
yeah, we had a couple of. I mean, overall, it went remarkably smooth. Like, we didn't miss a flight, we didn't miss a connection. Our flights were delayed, you know, a couple times, but where we didn't have a connecting flight.
All those fears were.
But we had there were little hiccups.
Always hiccups. But you guys, that's just what you have to prepare for whenever you travel, but especially when you travel long term.
Yeah, so, we were in one.
Another question.
What?
Guys, do more other questions.
Oh no, go ahead. You were saying?
Yeah, go ahead.
She won't let me answer.
Well, I wanted to get your other topics.
Okay, no, but I was just curious about like you said that everything went smoothly, but really at the end, something called COVID-19 came along and threw a big monkey wrench into your plans. Tell us about that.
Well, at the time, we were in Turkey, in Cappadocia, when President Trump or Mike Pompeo announced all Americans come back. And we were just like, hey, we have like 3.5 more months left on our trip, and so we.
And sorry, what were those countries, or that you were, or region at least, that during those 3 months? What were you going to be going to?
So we were in the Middle East. Basically, we were heading off to Egypt, and we were watching this COVID for at least a month. We were already traveling very safely. We were wearing masks all the time. We had gloves and hand sanitizers, and so we had all of the things that are now commonplace in our society with us, and we were able to obtain them in these countries. So we headed off to Egypt. We really wanted to hit our 7th continent, and it was in Egypt when we realized that things were just, the ability to be able to continue to travel was going to be very, very difficult. Borders were starting to shut around the world.
So it actually, we got really lucky in terms of like the ordering of the countries we went to. So like we had done China and all of Asia in the fall. We had done half of Europe in the fall. So, the COVID starts to, hit in China and then spreads to Europe. Well, in January, February, and the first part of March, we were in South and Central America where there were no cases.
No reported cases.
No reported cases. So we kind of like, we're watching this thing from afar, not really knowing like how bad it's going to get. But we're like, okay, for the present, we're in Colombia and Peru and Ecuador and there's no cases. And so it's when we left Brazil after the first week in March and went to Turkey. And then we were in Turkey and we were, in Istanbul and then Cappadocia. And that's when like borders started to shut at countries, even though there weren't a lot of cases. So we were going after Egypt. We were going to Israel, Jordan, Oman, Qatar, UAE. Well, Israel closes their border, Oman closes their border, and we're like, okay, like, we're obviously not going from Egypt to the Middle East anymore. But it's like, I did not want to give up. Like, I'm like, okay, like, you got safety. So when we're in Turkey, we're like, I'm trying to plan a trip around the Balkans. I'm like, okay, well, there's no cases. It's Southern Europe. You don't have to get on planes. So like, and Leanne's like, you're crazy, So I'm working with this company in Albania to try and plan, a driving tour around, all those countries. And then, but we're like, we have to get to Egypt. It's our 7th continent. And so we flew to Egypt, to Cairo. We spent a day, did the, Great Pyramids in Cairo. And then, our son sends us a story about an American who got a false positive test in Egypt, and they put him in a military hospital, and he was still there 6 weeks later, even though he had been tested negative for 10 straight times. And so
they were taking good care of him.
From Cairo, we were going to go Aswan and Luxor, so we were going deeper into Egypt. And I was like, okay, Leanne, we got to pull the plug.
We threw it in the towel.
I'm like, we got our 7th continent, but at that point, I was like, okay, and that's when the U.S. was like, all citizens come back to the U.S.
But our house was rented, so we didn't want to kick out our tenants because we had made a promise to them. So we needed to kind of figure out where could we go for a couple of months. So we just tried to figure out, okay, well, let's get closer to the United States at the very least.
But it's a really cool question. We got to sit there and say, we can go anywhere in the world to quarantine for the next 3.5 months. Where do we go? It was,
Siberia, of course.
Yeah, it was really cool. So, I was looking at these remote islands in the, Oceania, Vanuatu and Nauru, and but it takes 5 days to get back to the U.S. So we ended up settling on the Caribbean because it's close to the East Coast. It's a 4-hour flight to get back to the U.S., the East Coast. My mom's in Florida. Leanne's mom's in New Jersey.
In case
so
we had to come back.
If we have to come, we're close.
We could row back.
And so it's cool. So I just we just started doing these criterias. Okay, let's take the Caribbean. Look up unsafe countries in the Caribbean. Take those off the list. We took off countries with populations greater than 100,000, looked for low population density countries. And then we did, look, there's a world health ranking of the countries. And so at the end, we actually had 2 that were on the top 100 health one. It was Dominica and Antigua. And so Antigua has 80,000 people. It's very low population density. And so we go on Airbnb, and Antigua, the first thing that pops up is this gorgeous house on in a remote cove. So it's on the other side of the island from the capital and the ports. There's one other house on this cove. It's not near anything. And at that point, the Airbnb owner lived in Vancouver. Her sister had just canceled. So she had just put the house back on 3 hours before I did the search.
Another lucky break.
And because we were getting there long term, we were able to work out a good deal with her where, we ended up paying less than we would have if we came back here and had to rent an Airbnb in Los Angeles.
We really liked that. And I think the one thing about Antigua in general was just we were in a lockdown situation for a few weeks. We're obviously not from that country. But the people there took such good care of us. They were neighbors. There was a driver that was just went over and beyond, making sure that we were safe, making sure we had food. I actually got hurt when I was in Antigua. I fell during a typical little kind of hike. A car driver stopped right away, opened his door, and said, "I'll take you wherever you need to go." And
did you break your leg?
I broke my ankle. Yeah, and it was just down a gravelly hill, and just a typical hike you might take anytime when you're on a.
Did you know you broke it, or
as soon as it happened? Yeah, I knew it was broken. Okay. But he actually, the driver had driven by, turned around, came back, and said, "I saw you fall. where can I take you?
Wow.
And so, and we were out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, we were so lucky. I mean, I couldn't even walk a single step. And so, even from that, another neighbor dropped everything. She called to a doctor to make sure that I got a cast on right away. And people brought me soup and food. And it was just really so, I don't know, my heart is just so warmed by the hundreds of people that were so warm to us during our trip and just welcomed us into their countries, taught us about their countries, gave us their food. And I know you've had similar experiences in your travels. But I hope that my children, can really appreciate the world in a way that is just amazing. Because people that didn't have a lot still were giving and giving and giving to us as people that they knew were just visiting their country. They were so proud of their country and so proud of their cultures that they shared it with us.
How did your children deal with the COVID crisis? Did they just roll with the punches pretty easily, or did any of them kind of really get
we went from going like 150 miles an hour traveling to now settled in this house, and because we were in lockdown, we were kind of stuck in this house, right? I would have to say that I almost see a new level of maturity in our kids after the 9 months. We sat them down and said, okay, now it's time to really focus on your academics and your goals of your life. And so we used the COVID experience of quarantining in a place that we didn't even know to do that. And so one of our children needed to catch up on her curriculum because she was the one who was homeschooling during the year. And our 4 older teens all chose a subject. Every day they created a school for her, going through the standard of curriculum that she needed to get through in rocket speed time. 2 of our children, 2 teens, sat down in their rooms and wrote a book. They both wrote books, and they'll be coming out in the next year, which is, I'm so excited.
Have they picked the title yet?
Yeah, so one of them is, the working title is Small Countries, Big Cultures. So he chose 10 of the...
Which kid is this, sorry?
This is John, the opera singer.
Okay, John, the opera singer.
He likes culture, right?
And
so he chose that as his working title, and basically he just did a deep dive into the histories and cultures of 10 of the countries that are lesser known. He didn't choose the France and the China. He chose smaller countries that he felt that he had never really been exposed to any kind of deep way in his kind of American curriculum. And so it's just such a great book, and I can't wait for people to see it. So we will have it on Global Teen Adventures in a couple of months' time. So if you are listening to this,
GlobalTeenAdventures.com. Yes, no, it's great.
we'll put the book up there for you to buy it, okay? And we'll put a code for your anybody who says your name your podcast, we'll give them 20% off.
Awesome.
It's the MBA in us.
And then our nephew wrote a book on. He's very into environmental science, and so his book looked at the places we went to, the kind of best environmental practices of the countries and the worst environmental practices, and kind of did this book what we can learn from kind of the best ones, and then the ones that are not doing well on that front.
And that's the nephew who actually did a lot of environmental cleanups with our other son. They're both Eagle Scout candidates, and so whenever they saw a place was dirty, they would just go and get some gloves and some trash bags and just start picking it up. So we did that in Thailand, we did that in Borneo, we did it in Antigua, where when you have a group of 7, you can get a lot done. So service was an important element to our trip. It included the free concerts that John did, those environmental cleanups. We taught English in Indonesia, and we volunteered at the Panda Research Center. So that was an element I just wanted to kind of throw up, because so important to have that kind of service element to any long travel trip.
Yeah, and it's hard when you're constantly moving. Now, what was some of the lessons that you learned? Anybody who has children listening to this and they want to travel with their children, what advice would you give them to how to keep harmony in the family when there's so many disparate, desires?
I would say one thing is to really involve the children in where you're going. And that was the one lesson that we learned, I think, is when our teens really just kind of took over that what they wanted to see. And of course, we made sure that there was an educational or enrichment and aspect to most of what we did. You do have to have a balance between fun and learning. But there's a lot of fun and learning that can happen together as well. So, and we continue to kind of put into our kids what a privilege travel is. It really is not something that, is affordable to everybody in the world. And we're fortunate that we were able to do this. But it really is a gift, and to really look at every day that you have on earth as a gift, especially when you're traveling, it's just a blessing. And so having that appreciation, and our kids have been really appreciative of the opportunity to be able to get to do this. So I would say also, just teaching the tolerance. Like, I think in today's world, we see how tolerance and inclusivity is so important of a goal, and to be welcomed so warmly in other places. I expect that same from my kids when people are welcomed into our house or into our country. So I want our kids to have that kind of feeling. So
yeah, I mean, one of the original goals of the trip is the world has just become a global place. And I remember at our HBS reunion, like 10 years ago, they put up a slide that compared to, when we went to now, like the number of international cases when we went, it was now like 70%. It was like 20 when we went, the number of international. And you could just look at this slide and see how the world is changing, and that it's really hard to learn about culture, people, language, history sitting in a classroom. Like, reading is so much different than experiencing. And so, right. That was one of our core philosophies, is that, it was a year of global education, on the ground with the locals in the local countries, where you just learn a different way and experience things a different way. So that was one of the, the huge goals. In terms of, managing it, one of the key things we did was to make sure to build in just down weeks. Like in Thailand, we stayed at Riley Beach, pool, beach, and kind of just said, hey, if you want to do some activities, great, but if you want to just sit and relax for a week, you sit and relax for a week. So, we tried to make sure we built in a couple, at least 5-day periods where it was just really downtime. The other important thing, I think, was we let kids opt out of stuff on any given day.
If it was appropriate, and it was, we felt like it was safe for them to do it that
but
day.
It would, it couldn't be like where they're opting out of stuff 5 days in a row. But on any given day, if someone's like, I'm just tired, fatigued, take the day off, So I think that was important, that they could kind of just raise their hand and say, okay, I need a break today.
Would those kids stay in the hotel room, or would they go out and just wander the streets?
No, they really had to kind of stay in the accommodations. And that's why it was super important. It depended on where we stayed. There were certainly places I've said, well, no, I don't feel comfortable with that today. So it really kind of really depended on whether it was possible or not. So if it looked like we could have a chance to give them downtime, we certainly did. And for the most part, only really one of our kids really felt like she needed more downtime than the others, and she was the youngest. So, but I got to give my kids credit. I mean, we really pushed hard on this trip in terms of the velocity of things that we were expecting our kids to do. The pace was super high, and I think that it was almost welcomed in a sense to do have that Antigua slowdown period before we came back home. And when I first envisioned this trip, I actually envisioned it more like a month in one spot, so that we could really get to know the culture. And I felt like when we were in the Caribbean, because we were just kind of there, I did feel like we really just digested the culture more, in terms of, we learned a lot about the history of the plantations in the Caribbean, because we actually visited a former plantation, which was later, made into actually a sugar company. And then we read all about that kind of history that happened in this small nation. It was only made a UN nation in 1981. It had been a British colony up until 1981, which seems so late in the history of the world. One of the youngest countries we visited. And so, those are kind of, that's how I felt.
I think the other thing we did was we also broke up the continents. So we went to Europe, and then we went to Asia. Then we came back to Europe. Then we went back to Asia. And I think that was important because if we had done like 4 months in Europe or 3 months in Europe, 3 straight months in Asia, the kids that weren't as into that, continent start to get bored and fatigued. But by kind of breaking it up and going back and forth, the kids that liked Europe better were, okay, well, it's 3 weeks, 4 weeks in Asia, then we go back to Europe. The people that like Asia better, it's like, okay, it's 4 weeks in Europe, and then we go to Asia. So I think that helped kind of, break it up and spread around the types of things we did for the, different interests of the kid.
And one thing I would add is anyone that is thinking about a trip like this, I truly believe, and of course now with COVID, it kind of changes the game slightly, but as travel kind of rebounds, I would say that there are all sorts of budget levels for any type of traveler, and just having a sabbatical in any kind of sense, even if you can only do it for 2 months or 3 months, or we could do it for a whole full summer. I would just encourage this kind of concept of a journey, because we were so interdependent on each other as a family, and one of our goals was, here we had these 2 new children into our family, our niece and nephew, and our 3 biological children. And we really were trying to help bond them for the long term, because they were kind of a blended family. And I think we really achieved that. Like, they're truly independent on each other. They're each other's best friends in a sense. And, I'm really happy that we embarked on this journey. It did cost some money, but I would say that any family that wants to do this with enough planning and saving could make it happen, because travel, there's all sorts of levels of travels, and it, there are countries out there that are actually incredibly inexpensive to travel in, especially in Southeast Asia, and you can really enjoy a great trip and a great experience. We dipped ourselves in ritual baths in Indonesia. In Bali, temple. We dumped it. We got all dressed up, and the tour guide wanted us to do this, and so we said, okay, so we'll do it, and we got to really experience their lifestyles, and we walked with Tibetans around the city of Lhasa, just in their typical group of people as they do the prayer wheels, and they are practicing their Tibetan Buddhism, and I mean we just had so many. We were invited into indigenous villages where they would feed us exactly what they eat. We felt like we were in a Survivor episode, right? And so, here I'm thinking all these fears. I'm like, oh my God, what if we lose something, or if we get stolen, or we lose a child, and none of that happened. We were just either, the little things that did happen were just kind of hiccups. And so I would just say, face your fears and just, plan for safety, and you can make it work. So I would encourage anyone, and feel free to reach out to us at our website if any family is thinking about doing this, because we figured out some of the quirks.
Yeah, globalteenadventures.com has an amazing resource. You guys have done an incredible job. There's so many. There's so much information that I don't even know where you found the time to do it, because a lot of it was there. We'll get into that in a second. But just focusing on the family aspect, what are some money-saving tips? Because people are listening to this, they might be saying, you know what, I would love to take my family on a vacation or on a sabbatical of 2-3 months, but how the hell can I afford it? What are some ways to kind of cut down the costs that you discovered?
Well, one thing that we did, I think, and I think this might change in the post-COVID era is we would always look for accommodations that had breakfast included, because a breakfast included means you can stock up, and they usually don't care if you grab an extra banana for your day. So, and the extra cost, we did not find it to be prohibitive. We were always also balancing this idea of, is it cheaper to stay in an Airbnb or is it cheaper to stay in hotels? And it really depends. You have to really shop around and look for. Another thing I think we did really well, Kyle did excellently, it was just kind of planning a couple months ahead. There are a few websites that are also like really good at just price, like finding, you can use websites apps to help find just things super inexpensively. And a couple of
Kyle, why don't you share, since you're Kyle, share those apps that you like.
That you love.
Well, so I will, but I did want to answer. So I think one of the keys is the expensive cities. We were really flexible on getting like cheap accommodations that were not ideal. In Sydney, we got an Airbnb with 1 bedroom and 1 bathroom, and the kids were sleeping on the couch and mattresses on the floor. And we kind of figured, we're going to be out all day, most of the day anyway. So, and so we really, like Dublin was expensive, Munich, Sydney, and all those places. We got kind of, pretty low, budget Airbnbs, and just, we had to be flexible. We were going to be out most of the day. And then, when in places that were cheaper, where it was like, hey, we're going to do less during the day, for, still less than that, you can get an Airbnb that's a lot nicer, in a cheaper country. So, I think that was one of the things we saw. The apps, TripIt was the number one app managing all this. You make a reservation, you forward the email to TripIt. It's got everything in there. And with 7 people, all 7 of us had access to it. Everybody knew, what the schedule was, where we were going when. Skyscanner was really good for the international flights. The other biggest thing is the throwaway tickets. Because we were going one way everywhere, I always looked and saw, like, if you put a round trip in, even if you don't use the second ticket, a lot of times it's cheaper than the one-way flight. So, like,
wow.
Going from Egypt to Antigua, I got to cut the price by like 30% just getting a round-trip ticket and just throwing away the second ticket. And it takes a lot of work because you're like, you got to set them one way, find the best price, the time, transfers, and then, start playing around with round trip dates. And some of the times you had to sit there for 20 minutes plugging in every date for the next 3 months. And all of a sudden it's like 2 months out, the price like falls through the floor. So, there's a lot of variables, in the flights, right? Like usually flights early morning and late at night are cheaper than the midday flights. So you got to kind of say, okay, kids were going to have to get up at 4 a.m. to get this, 6:30 flight, but you can save a lot of money over, sleeping until 9 and getting the 12 o'clock flight. The one thing, I had to really be cognizant is getting in late in countries that, it might, we felt like there might be a safety concern, getting into Turkey at 1 a.m, right? And having to get into Istanbul. So, but there's always,
that's any place.
Looking at direct flights versus layovers, like it takes a lot of work, but if you're diligent, you can really find ways to save money, especially on air travel and the accommodations.
Now, how did you guys do the blogging? Because your blog, I would get your emails every couple of days, and I was just blown away by the level of, detail, length. I was like, where do these guys have the time to write, all these details? I mean, and why did you do it also? I mean, so tell us a little bit about that whole blogging experience.
I know that when I first started traveling in my early 20s, look back at those travel blogs and I realize how much you don't remember and how much it brings you back to that day when you've actually really, categorize, like just write your thought stuff for that day. And so I knew it was really important to me. I know Kyle really wanted to blog as well. So we would actually almost we would trade off. It's like, okay, I started it. Why don't you finish it? I know it's not perfect on the website. We need to edit them a little bit, but we just said we would think it'd be better to just get out even something that's not completely perfect or not completely edited. So many people followed us on our journey, our friends, our families, acquaintances. So we walk around town and we're like, oh my God, I love this story about the scorpion. And, and we tried to share the funniest elements of the day to make it more entertaining for people because a lot of funny things happen to you, right? It's just funny, right? Whether it's language barriers or animals that you run into in the street. I think we had at least 10 different animals that came into the middle of the street wherever we were. Some that we didn't even recognize what the animals were, which was a great teaching moment for our kids as well. So, those are the moments. So we really stayed up in the middle of the night and, just did it on airplanes and anytime we were riding, we're just on our phones, just writing it out. So it was important to us.
Yeah. I think we knew we were going to do so much stuff. If we didn't take the time to write it and document everything we did on a day by day basis, we would never remember everything that happened, during the 9, what was going to be 12 months. And so, as Leanne said, there were times when I'm like, all right, we're getting behind, I'd get up at 2 a.m. to write till 7 a.m. when we went out, or, as Leanne said, every time we're on a plane, I had the blog open, writing. And so, it was a lot of work, but, it's awesome because now, we go back and look through it and it's like, oh yeah, I didn't even remember that, story.
We relive it, our memories, it's really for our memories. So that we're 80 years old, we can be reading it over. And I love the fact that Kyle printed it out and sent it to my father and he read every page, which he loved our story. So even though he's, not going to take a trip like this in his life, he certainly can live it with us. So.
Did you encourage your children to do some journaling themselves?
Yes, they did. They were not as interested as putting it up out to the world, but that was important. And in fact, having an educational element to every day was important. So they did take classes online, and they did do a lot in terms of investigating the histories of where we were going and things like that. So we made sure that there was an educational bent to every day because what a great opportunity to learn about the world, right?
Absolutely. And you got to see 9 of the wonders of the world, different lists, the modern world, the natural world, the ancient world. I see that you've written down you've got 90 museums, 25 national parks, 170 religious places of worship, 91 UNESCO sites. And it's just incredible all the different things that you've been able to document on globalteenadventures.com. Now, when you're looking back, what could you have done better or differently? Kind of if you had to do it all over again, what kind of lessons would you do?
So I do want to throw in one. We had all 7 wonders of the modern world on the schedule. So we had Petra and the Colosseum in Rome.
We will get there on our next trip.
that was one of our low points when we had to cancel because all the kids, every wonder of the world, we'd hold up, our 1 family picture, the Great Wall, and 2. And so that was something the kids got really into. And so
that's okay. We're going to make it happen.
We still have 2 more to go.
We'll make it happen after COVID and the world is in a different place. But he has what
as far as lessons learned that you would have done differently?
I wish we had spent a little bit more time before the trip. We were so busy just doing the logistical stuff. We did spend some time kind of preparing for the countries beforehand, but I think I wish I had done a little bit more in terms of that. I think you can never do enough of reading about other cultures and other histories before you showed up. And we did do some. I wish I had done 3 or 4 times more of it. But now I can enjoy it in retrospect. So we're learning, our minds are open to learning about more cultures.
Yeah, I think it was such a successful trip that I'm not sure. I mean, what Leanne said, definitely, but in terms of the trip itself, one of the things, that we got from you is kind of hike your own hike, right? Mm-hmm. And so this was we were getting people saying, oh, you need to go here, over here, but in the end, it's like, this was our own hike, our own trip. And right. So, for us to kind of plan it, end to end and pick the places was something that I think was really special for us to experience. But I can't think of a lot that I would have done differently other than try and leave 3 months earlier and avoid the COVID.
Having a better crystal ball.
Yeah.
But what about how you guys have changed personally? I mean, here you guys are both Harvard Business School graduates. You had kind of a good corporate life at Stamps.com, Kyle. And Leanne, you've also had a good professional life as well. And now all of a sudden you went on this big trip. How has it transformed you, maybe changed your values in certain ways? I know you talked a little bit about minimizing your stuff and getting rid of stuff. Any other thoughts that you have, and how do you look forward to the next stage of your life or your career?
I have to say, really just being completely, humbled and honored to have had this opportunity, really. So few people in the world could or would make this happen for their lives or their children. So I just feel so privileged that we had this opportunity, that I feel that I have this kind of need to really kind of advance. I've done philanthropic work in equity already, and I think that it just kind of remotivates me in a way to help move the world forward in terms of humanitarian efforts or just really trying to bring the world a little closer. And so I already do this work, in my life as a volunteer, but I guess it just really motivates me more because of the people that I got to meet, and just to really experience their challenges and their perspectives, and just the kindness that was continually shown to us, like every day. Even when, I dropped money, people would pick it up and give it to me. I was like, I dropped my passport in an airport. He doesn't know about that. Someone picked it up and gave it to me. And I was just like, wow, it's just amazing to me, the amount of kindness of people just, we actually were in New Zealand, and these people walked up to us and just gave us free tickets. They're just like, hey, we're not going to use these. You want them? In LA, I think they would be trying to charge us 2 times the price. I'm sorry, I shouldn't really, but I'm just saying that overwhelming kindness that's out in the world. And I know the media kind of focuses so much on what's bad in the world. But you have to look at your everyday, what is good about your world today, and let that kind of just motivate you to spread that joy.
Yeah, I think for me, it really stretched and challenged kind of my thinking and perspectives on different areas. And I think it goes back to, it's one thing to read about something, but it's totally different to experience it. And so there were a few different areas I think that really hit home. One is, places we were where there was, oppression, war, occupation, seeing what people went through, and there were a couple powerful kind of moving moments, in Cambodia. We were driving with our local tour guide by the killing fields, and he's like, yeah, Pol Pot killed my father and 3 uncles. Talking to this guy, and he starts crying, and it's like, oh my God, this is, it's one thing to read Pol Pot wiped out a generation. It's another than to be talking to, somebody who lost, a huge part of his family, in that process. We went to the Dachau concentration camp in Munich, and, that was very powerful, just being there and, and getting an understanding of, what they went through. The Museum of Occupation in Estonia and Latvia were very powerful. They were getting occupied, deported to Siberia, killed in the middle of the night. And so, there were a lot of things where you just saw over and over again, and it just gave you a deeper kind of understanding and appreciation for, what people go through, in different places in the world. Another area was religion. I think we're Catholic, and so, in Los Angeles, we go to church and we, live our Catholic life, but never really exposed to other religions. And so it was pretty amazing, you saw 170, religious places of worship. We went to, Buddhist temples, Shinto shrines, Sikh temples, Hindu temples, Jewish synagogues, and that was really Muslim mosques. And it's you see how many people are passionate about what they believe in. And, it's well, how do I reconcile that with my faiths and beliefs? And, it really, again, kind of stretches your thinking and gives you a deeper appreciation for religious diversity. Another is environmental. We are killing our planet, and again, it's not that you don't know these things, but when you go places firsthand, you go to Antarctica and, the seals, the weather is warmer, so the baby seals are being born later. Their mothers leave in October, and now they're dying because they can't survive on their own. Penguins with the rain, when they're first born, they don't have waterproof fur, and so now the rain is killing the penguins. Right after we were in Antarctica, they had a record heat wave, and 30% of the ice shelf melted.
And we witnessed the icebergs kind of crashing down on multiple occasions on our trip. So
we go to Ecuador, the Amazon rainforest, and you see oil drilling, and places in the rainforest just being wiped out, for oil drilling,
on Everest, you probably saw the receding glaciers.
Yep, the receding glaciers there. And, it was interesting because in Indonesia, we did a volunteer week teaching English. And so my nephew, Corey, and I were teaching environmental conservation to sixth graders. And, the mentor guy, our group guy, was look, there's no recycling here. At this point, we just want them not to burn trash and not to throw trash on the ground. That's your whole goal to try and instill in them, So we just saw places, Halong Bay is this beautiful UNESCO site. The bay was littered with plastic bottles, just all over the place. So, I think
wasn't the case 20 years ago, the first time I went to Halong Bay. So it was disturbing to me to see that difference over time.
And so that, we come back and I'm okay, I'm going to think about buying plastic water bottles, and not going to do it, and minimizing, electricity use and things like that. So, I think there were just these areas where it just, we came back with such an appreciation of what we have here, and then how do you how do you take what we learned and turn around and try and give back to the rest of the world?
Right, absolutely. And so this is such an amazing story. I really want to encourage everybody to go to your website and learn a lot more. And where can people find out more about it? Is it just globalteenadventures.com?
Yep. globalteenadventures.com. We will put on, any books that we will be publishing from this, and we'd love to hear from you. So there'll be a link on there how you can get in touch with us. And if you're thinking about doing a trip like this, we'd love to, help you out with advice.
Fantastic, Kyle, Leanne. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it, and we're going to hear about your... I forgot one last thing. Last question is, when's your next trip? Post-COVID, I imagine.
Where's our next trip?
Well, so it's interesting because, we were talking about the importance of keeping up the blog. Well, Leanne and I knew, one of our goals was going to be to write a book about the trip. And so, we, kind of that second phase post-corporate life is kind of, writing books and, and focusing on the travel aspects. Our youngest will be in college in 6 years. So I think we were looking at it as when all the kids are in college,
we'll travel again. We'll get to
travel again.
But less people and less complexity.
Yeah. And if any
More
of the
beaches.
kids are available, you take the kids. But it's become for us, I think, a long-term goal. We were talking the other day in a post-COVID world, when the kids are out, it's like, hey, you can live here for 6 months and go travel for 6 months, or travel for 9 months.
We'll see how the world is and what we can afford.
But it's something, I think that is going to be part of our life, for, the next 20 years is really I mean, there's so many parts of the world we didn't get to see.
Yeah, we got the travel bug.
Just in those 3 months we had to cancel, we had 20 countries planned, Africa, the Middle East, Southern Europe. So
yeah. But thank you for
Thank
having us
you.
on.
Yes.
This has been great and good to see you. All right.
Likewise. And that concludes this episode of the WanderLearn podcast, where we explore travel, technology, and transformation. If you'd like to see the show notes with links to what we talked about, or if you'd like to comment on the show, or if you'd like to ask me a question, then go to WanderLearn.com and click on this episode. If you'd like to connect with me, just remember Tapon. That's my first initial and my last name. Tapon is the username I use on all social media. You can also get to my website by going to ftapon.com. And here's one last reason to remember Tapon. If you like what I do and would like to get rewarded for supporting my projects, then go to patreon.com/ftapon. That's where you can pick up some remarkable rewards for as little as $2 a month. And now for 5 quick favors. Number 1, subscribe to the WanderLearn podcast. 2, download it. 3, share it. 4, review it somewhere. And 5, sign up for my newsletter at WanderLearn.com. Our theme music was composed by Eric Stratman. This is Francis Tapon, encouraging you to wander and learn.